Welcome to the truck presentation of Retiring Well. I'm Keith McGuire. With me today are Michelle Flintoff, Barbara Morrett, and Terry Robertson. Three different people, three different stories, and yet some common threads among all three stories. When we talk about retiring well, what do we really mean? Well, it's not about finance. No, that's the most common thing in our society and our culture is to talk about finance. Do I have enough money to retire? Will I run out of money when I retire? No, we're taking a more of a Christian perspective on what does it mean to retire well. It's kind of strange because retirement isn't even a word that's in Scripture. So how do, as Christians, we figure this out? First of all, I think it's actually a clue that that word isn't in Scripture. What is in Scripture that we can turn to? There's a few basic things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and love others as yourself. That theme is there, and that's repeated over and over in Scripture. And I think you're going to see today three people with three different stories, but there's a common thread throughout all three. So we're going to start off with Michelle Flintoff first. Michelle is a lifelong resident of Washington State. She's been involved extensively in banking and investment. And Michelle did that for over 40 years. And there's a slight twist in her retirement in that she retired and then went back to work for a while. And I think you're going to enjoy her story. Michelle, will you start us off, please?
Hi, my name is Michelle Flintoff. I've been a member of Harbor Covenant for approximately 14 years. And the reason why I remember that period of time is because my very first Sunday here at Harbor Covenant was also the first Sunday that Michael preached his first sermon as the new pastor. So that's kind of stuck in my brain. So I am here today. I would like to share with you my experience and hope that this may provide you some additional support on the subject of retirement. You know, we're all taught in life to stand on our own 2 feet, to be an independent thinker, to be our own person, to make decisions, to take charge. We are taught to be responsible for our own personal change as we try to guide our little vessel through life. However, at some point in time in our lives, we ultimately recognize and surrender to the obvious conclusion: we can't go it alone. In order to achieve success and to have a fulfilled life and a purpose-filled life, we need the help of others. So this is a personal and spiritual process. A little bit about myself. I was a single parent raising my 2 children. I focused predominantly on doing my best at balancing my work with my children. I needed to make sure that they got the proper amount of time because I was a single parent. Any thoughts on retirement? I met with mixed emotions, mostly fear. And I had a definite feeling of being totally unprepared. It wasn't until later in my working career that I was able to begin to focus my attention on planning for my retirement. Honestly, my natural tendency is to allow fear to creep back in. I would always kind of revert back to my old usual thoughts of, how am I going to do this? These were new waters for me, and I needed help. Ultimately, I corrected my course. I started, number one, to take that fear and get it out of me and put it down on paper. I made a list of all the things that I was concerned about with my retirement. I took those questions one by one, prayed over them, gave them to God, and then asked for guidance for resources. I want you to know there's a huge huge variety of resources out there regarding retirement. Obviously, we have our professional resources, but even simple resources like, if I'm not working, what am I going to do? And it's funny because I one time walked down to the Gig Harbor Chamber of Commerce. Boom, resources. They had senior resources for out on the peninsula, in Gig Harbor. There's a ton in their literature. And that was kind of nice. It kind of gave me a start point. And the reason why I needed a start point was because of COVID. I, worked from home a lot during that period of time. But even earlier on, when you're working, you don't have, and raising a family or being a mom or a grandma. I'm a grandma now. I'm a great grandma now. Anyway, when your life is that busy, you really need some guidance on resources are out there. And an important thing I found, especially during COVID, was cultivating friends who could help me. I'll give you one example because I'm sure the rest of the people will give us a lot more. One of the resources I needed, I have a very modest income, and I knew that there were certain things that I wanted to get in order during my retirement years, but and I know lawyers do a great job of doing all of that for you, but that wasn't within my financial abilities. So during my period of networking, I talked with a friend, and she recommended go see We the People. That financial organization worked extremely well for me and helped me get all those important things in order. So that's just one example of the importance of not doing this alone. When you pray to God, He provides resources. The other thing is very important to me that I want to share with you about retirement. It's not about the financial setting aside of money. It helps, but that's not what it's about. It's also time to listen. It's a time to be open-minded and possibly embrace a new path. I have learned that this is not a time to fade away and disappear, but it's a time to take what I have learned and to be willing to share that with others. Part of that then is not sitting back and resting on my laurels. I need to make a decision to be available, to be willing to listen, and when asked, key thing, when asked, to share my experience and understandings. The other example of that is, my children are grown. As I said, I'm a grandma and I'm a great grandma. And so I've been able to be there for my children in a variety of ways. Other people will also talk about travel. That was something I always wanted to do, was do big traveling. That didn't come to pass. What did come to pass, though, was such a fun experience. My brother's wife needed to go on a extended time away from home to be with family. So he and I went for a drive in his car all over. We went to Arizona, Nevada. We went to different places, and I got to see a lot of beautiful things. And that really filled up my bucket list. When I retired, I organized my little patio, and the one thing that I did that I wanted to share with you is I bought this sign, and I have this little patio divider, and it was a little wooden sign, and I put it up, and the sign was a quote from Psalm 33, verse 3. And the psalm says, "Sing a new song of praise to Him." That was my gift of retirement. That was probably something that was my ultimate theme. This has really helped me to understand and deeply, deeply embrace the message of that little sign. Thank you for letting me share.
Michelle, thank you for sharing that. I really enjoy how you face the challenges of retirement, and I appreciate that you even use that word fear, because I think a lot of us have a fear of retirement. And you dealt with it, you dealt with the changes in retirement, and I really appreciate your sharing that. Thank you. Next up is Terry. Terry was raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he was a journalist, still is a journalist, still writes quite well. Last 20 years of his career, Terry was a newspaper editor for the San Francisco Chronicle. Terry's got a little bit of different twist to his retirement story in that he not only changed, leaving the high-pressure job of a deadline for a newspaper editor, but he also changed geographic locations. Terry, can you share your story with us, please?
Hi, I'm Terry Robertson, and I've been at Harbor Covenant Church for 4 years. I arrived here shortly after I retired from a fulfilling 41-year career in journalism. But at the age of 67, I was done, and I was ready to leave the Bay Area, which had become increasingly crowded. I expected to retire in my 70s, but so in essence, I retired early. I had gone to see a financial planner who told me that I was okay to retire. He gave me the green light. The next thing I did was accept an invitation from a friend to go to a seminar in San Francisco called The Art of Retirement. I learned the most astounding things. There are 4 pillars to retirement, and the financial aspect is the least important of those 4 pillars. That's not to diminish financial planning. That is just simply because it's still a pillar, but it's simply to say there are other things that lead to a happy, successful, and vibrant retirement. And they are in this order: community, embrace friends and family. The second is have your own interests and hobbies. The third is to do something larger than yourself. The fourth is finance. Now, finance I'd been given the green light on. I had a plan to move up here to Gig Harbor following friends of mine and my wife's, Rand and Patty Fisher, who had moved up here from the Bay Area in 2017. So I had community. They introduced me to Harbor Covenant, which gave me a larger community, and then they introduced me to their small group, which has given me a more intimate spiritual community. So that was set. I'm a widower, so I didn't have a lot of hobbies. It was basically work and then taking care of my kids and then being involved in their lives. My wife died in 2010. I had an 11-year-old daughter and I had a 16-year-old daughter, and I wanted to make sure they were okay. They're doing great. So my hobbies are being developed now. I like gardening, I like kayaking, I like hiking, etc. The bigger part of it is doing something bigger than myself. I had a plan. I had been involved in a widowers group in the Bay Area, and I still meet with them on Zoom. It was an organic group, and the idea was a bunch of Christian men who get together. It started with 2 widowers getting together once a month on Saturdays, and then just supporting each other and getting through life, and then ending with a devotional. I thought that would be a great thing that I could do in retirement up here in Gig Harbor. The thing is, it gained no traction. I found that guys, even widowers, are really busy. They're involved in a lot of hobbies and other activities, and so it didn't gain traction, and then the pandemic hit. And you know what happened then? We got somewhat isolated. We couldn't gather as we could, not even in church. And I got out and did some kayaking and hiking. I had a bubble group of friends, and so that worked out well. But there were days where I think we all experienced where there was some isolation. And as I was sitting at home 2 or 3 days in a row without a bunch of friends around, I began to think, is this life, is this what it's like for people who are somehow physically limited from being able out of their house very often? Maybe there's something there for me that I can help with. And sometime soon after, Pastor Michael gave a sermon in which he suggested that we all listen to God, what God is telling us through the pandemic. And I took that to heart, and the next time I saw him, I told him about what I'd thought about maybe helping people who have to be in their houses most of the time. he directed me to Sammy McCubbin's Director of Pastoral Care. And it wasn't long before that she had me involved in what we call internally as the Barnabas Group. That is a group that, remember that we didn't come to church for a while, but we wanted to show that we care about you, and so we had a group of volunteers from the church get together and make phone calls to check up, to see how are you doing and how we could pray for you. And then I got a text from her saying, would you be interested in helping one of our members of our congregation, Forrest Lane, to go to his boxing class at the Y? And I said, sure. Well, Forrest is one of the most interesting, fun guys that I know, but his body's being betrayed by Parkinson's. And so he doesn't get out of the house as much as he'd like, and I began to take him to these boxing classes, and a friendship formed. And as a result of that, we get together as much as we can, and we really enjoy each other's company. Recently, I've begun to see John Blyfus, another guy who has had some medical issues that prohibits him from getting out of the house much, and we've been going out, and that's a beginning relationship. So I'm enjoying that. On top of that, I greet people at church. I want to make people feel welcome when they come in the door. There are studies that show that when people come into church for the first time and they're new, they determine within the first few minutes whether they're going to return. I want to make sure that they at least feel welcome enough to return. And then I also like to do communion, because that's something to me that's an extremely holy moment, and I want to make sure that people don't take that for granted or don't in a rote fashion. I want them to really feel God's presence when they come up. I look at them in the eyes and I say, this is Jesus' body broken for you. I enjoy serving the church, and in fact, one of the things that I've gotten out of this is that I've finally learned what my spiritual gift is, and that is that I love to serve. And if you're thinking of retiring and don't know exactly what you want to do with your life after retirement, I would suggest that you find what your spiritual gift is. That will give you direction. And there are many people such as Sammy who will point you in a direction to help in the needs of the church. The lesson I have learned, and I'm thinking back to my idea of a widower's group, is that have a purpose and an interest that will serve God, but be prepared to be flexible. To put it in a spiritual sense, Proverbs 16:3 says, commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. My motivation for doing this is in the time that I have left here on this planet, I want to finish strong for God. I want to be His servant, not necessarily because I want to hear the words, well done, good and faithful servant, although I do, but it's more in a response to the tremendous grace and love He has given to me in the 40 years since I've become a Christian. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Terry, for sharing that story. I appreciate that you shared some of the difficulties you had, and it took a while to figure out what your gifting was and how that best applied in helping others. But you did that, and I appreciate your sharing those specifics with us of how that worked out. Next up, Barbara Morrett. Barbara spent a lot of years in the medical field. Barbara had some very responsible jobs. Some were in management, and some were in consulting and sales positions. Barbara traveled a lot. And I think one of the unique things about Barbara is that she used her management skills to outline what she was going to do in retirement. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Barbara. Your turn.
Hi, my name is Barbara Morrett. I've been a member of Harbor Covenant Church for, probably 15 years now. I retired 10 years ago, and when I look back on that, what were the questions that I asked myself about retirement? First of all is that how do I know it's time to retire? What am I going to do during the transition? How do I transition? And then what am I going to do in all my spare time? And finally is the age-old question, do I have enough money to retire? So I'll start with how did I know it was time? I actually started thinking about retirement seriously probably 2 or 3 years before, but I hadn't set a date. In 2012, the company that I was with went through a major reorganization. And as part of that reorganization, I got a new boss. All of a sudden, I had this voice inside me that said, it's time. I think God knew before I did that it was time to retire. So anyway, I set up a meeting with my new boss. I went in and told him I was delighted to be able to working with him. And oh, by the way, I'm going to retire. But I'm going to give you 14 months notice. That would get me through the next fiscal year. Well, of course, all of my co-workers said, you are absolutely nuts for giving them that much time, because if we go through any downsizing of courses, you'll be the first to go. Well, that didn't happen. Luckily, it all turned out well. But then I had another godly sighting. Pastor Michael called me a couple months later and said, as part of our new leadership team, we want to do an evaluation of all the missions and missionaries that we're currently supporting. There was like 20 plus of them. He said, I need someone with business skills to do some kingdom work. What we want to do is put together a team, develop criteria to be able to evaluate all those missions and ministries, and then come up with recommendations to the leadership team on who should we really support going forward. Well, I said, I need to think about that. So I went home, did a lot of thought overnight, and prayed about it, and decided, yes, it was probably the right thing for me to do. So for the next 6 months before I retired, I'd be on a plane coming back from a business trip, thinking about how do you develop criteria for missionaries and missions. As it turned out, it was a lot of fun, and I realized that I enjoyed doing kingdom work. So then how do you transition? How do you transition from your business world to retirement? For me, I began the transition a good year beforehand. So in addition to working on the ministry involvement team, I looked out into the community for other serving opportunities. I have a soft heart for survivors of domestic violence, veterans coming back with PTSD or down on their luck, or really just the less fortunate. So I looked out into the community and decided that I could volunteer at the Northwest Furniture Bank, which is a nonprofit organization in Tacoma. And I worked as a shopping assistant, and that really worked out well because that's really their mission, is to help those that are in need. So later on, then I was asked to serve on the board of the Northwest Furniture Bank, and also then I served 2 terms on the leadership team here at Harbor Covenant. So once again, being able to use some of the skills that I learned in business over the years and apply those to volunteer work. As you think about how to transition into retirement and are looking for volunteer opportunities, I always tell people, follow your passion. What brings you joy? So for those of you that are transitioning from the business world, if you have skills in IT, in finance, HR, strategic planning, there are so many nonprofits out there and churches that you could actually volunteer with, and they could really utilize your skills. So if you are thinking about being able to use your skills as a handyman, you can volunteer at the Northwest Furniture Bank putting together IKEA furniture, or you can volunteer building homes at the Rescue Mission. If you enjoy doing yard work, maintenance, and gardening, you can volunteer at Camp Stand By Me out on the peninsula. That's one of the missions that we support here at Harbor Covenant Church. If you enjoy being able to do cooking and you like that, that's your gig, you can also be able to work with our hospitality team here at Harbor Covenant, or you can actually volunteer with the Rescue Mission. They always are needing people to be able to help with cooking. So there's just so many ways that you can volunteer using the talents and the passion that you have. And as I said earlier, follow your passion. So once you're retired, what can you expect? Well, for me, first of all, I was able to sleep late. I've never been an early morning person, and having to get up for years for early morning conference calls, etc., that was a real blessing for me. And then I was able to set up a schedule to exercise more, and that is so important as of course, as we age. And then I was able to travel around the country to visit friends, visit my family. My daughter, grandchildren, and son-in-law live in Charleston, so I was able to make frequent trips back there. And then it also gave me an opportunity to be able to spend more time with the Lord. So if you're not in a Bible study, you can join a Bible study or lead a Bible study. I also was able to join a precepts class, which was a weekly inductive study of the Bible. Finally, the question is that how can you afford to retire, or can you afford to retire? So about 3 years before I knew I was going to retire, I thought that I would, is that I changed brokerage firms that I used, and I went to worked with a financial planner. And that was so helpful to me to be able to come up with a financial plan for retirement. I wanted a steady monthly flow of income. So being able to look at, what do I do to be able to have those in addition to Social Security. I was 66 and a half when I retired, and that was the full retirement age for Social Security, but knew that I would need other funds. So they helped me being able to look at, what do I do with my 401k? Do I, in fact, want to have an annuity, et cetera? So it was very, very helpful. And I recommend to others that if you don't have a financial planner to help you put that retirement in place, that's a very important to do. One of the questions that often is asked is that, do you need more or less money in retirement? And some of the professionals will tell you you need less. Well, that was not the case for me, because when I worked, I traveled most every week. So from the time that I left my house to the time that I got home, all those expenses were paid. And so it was I found that I needed more money in retirement. I think for couples, that probably isn't the case, that it's less, but what you will need to do is there's going to have to be some negotiation and, of course, some compromise. And at the end of the day, you can't really put together a financial plan until you have that vision. What is it that you really and truthfully want to do, where you want to travel, what's kind of on your bucket list, et cetera, and then you can make a plan from there. Another thing that was very kind of a big realization or an aha moment for me is that inflation does exist. So when I retired in 2013, the amount of money that I had, the monthly flow coming in, worked perfectly fine for my expenses. What I find now 10 years later is that doesn't even begin to cover those expenses. So once again, is that you need to plan for that. I think once you think about retirement and what are the things is that you want to do, what is so very important is to remember to continue to tithe. Is that is such an important thing, because it's what it says in Luke 12 is that too much is given, much is expected. I think we also can realize and know that is that once you have enough money to meet your basic expenses, et cetera, is that money does not buy happiness or joy. So giving back to your community, both in your church and out in the community, that's the right thing to do. The last thing I was thinking about was estate planning. So part of your retirement plan is to go dust off that will or your trust, make sure that they're up to date, make sure that you know where the original is, make sure that you have a durable power of attorney and then a healthcare directive, and that those are up to date, and that all of those are in one place. That's a very important thing to do. Make sure you also include all the passwords to your electronic devices, because we know those change on a regular basis. And then sit down with your family and have a very frank discussion. Where is it that you're going to live? What about assisted living? Talk about funeral. What exactly do you want that to look like? Who's going to be your primary caregiver? All these different questions that are maybe difficult to ask, that's the right time to have those hard discussions with your family to make sure before a crisis occurs that they have a good, clear understanding of what it is that you want to do. My retirement journey has been filled with so many blessings. The Lord has allowed me to spend more time with my friends and my family. He's provided opportunities to be able to serve at church and in the community and be able to really grow in my faith. So I feel like I really have had the blessed opportunity to retire well. Finally, what does the Bible say about retirement? And that word isn't actually used in the Bible, but in Proverbs 16:31 it says, "Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life." Thank you for letting me share some of my story.
So that brings us to the end of our session. 3 individuals, 3 stories, and retiring well is there in all 3. What do we mean by retiring well? Loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and learning how to use your gifts well to reach out to other people. All 3 individuals developed that, looked at their gifting, their talents, their skills, and that made it a lot easier for them to reach out to other people around them. And that's what we mean with retiring well. Thank you for joining us.